Hi, I've just got home from school and it's very windy and wet out there. So I thought before I cooked dinner, I would just spend a little time reading chapter 7, The Witch in the Woods. Enjoy. It was very hard for the little rabbits to go back out into the winter forest. What little warmth they had gained from Redwater Warren soon vanished, and this time they had no idea where to run. As far as they knew, the whole world was against them and nowhere was safe. They knew they didn't have much of a head start either. The Gorm would be arriving at Redwater soon, and in 5 short minutes they would discover Podkin's severed ear. After that, they simply had to stroll along the trail of footprints in the snow, and then it would be all over in a flash of a twisted iron blade. Podkin wasn't too worried by it all. He had lost quite a lot of blood, which tended to make you dizzy and dozy. He was currently dreaming that he was walking on top of a fluffy white cloud. His sister was there, carrying a talking carrot that looked a lot like his brother Pook, and for some reason his ear was very sore. He thought he'd probably wake up soon, then go out and see if he could find a nice spot by the river for a snooze. Paz dragged him along by the arm, casting worried glances at his missing ear. The wound was still oozing blood, and the fur on his head was thickly matted with it. She needed to stop and bind it, but there just wasn't time. Pook had started shivering again. He was making quiet, miserable little whines, and she wasn't sure how much more of the cold he could take. She was trying her hardest to move quickly, not to leave such obvious tracks, to keep to the deeper part of the wood. All in all, she had begun to think it might be better if the Gorm did get them. At least it would be all over very quickly. Which is why she wasn't too surprised when they stepped into a clearing and saw a hunched, twisted crow sitting on a tree stump and staring with them the blank red eyes. "Oh no," she moaned. "Oh no." The crow blinked and tilted its spiked metal head, its beak open slightly, dripping some oily, coppery fluid. Its feathers rattled and scraped against each other, giving off a cloud of powdery orange rust. Paz tried to think of some way to stop it before it flew off and betrayed their whereabouts. Throw the dagger at it, jump on top of the thing and squash it. There was really nothing she could do. "Caw!" it squawked, and began to spread its wings for takeoff, when suddenly it exploded with a clang and a puff of iron feathers. Paz shrieked and stared at the drifting cloud of jagged plumage. The crow itself had been knocked to the floor, stone dead. "I hate those pesky birds," said someone on the other side of the clearing. Paz raised the dagger, ready to defend herself, as a stooped old she-rabbit in a patched cloak crunched towards them through the snow. Her hand clutched a leather sling, empty now of its pebble bullet. "They should learn to mind their own beeswax." "Hello?" said Paz. "Is it morning yet, Mummy?" said Podkin. "Soup," said Pook. "It's about time you 3 showed up," said the she-rabbit. "I've been waiting about in the snow for ages. Blooming cold, my poor feet are." You've been expecting us?" Now Paz wasn't sure she was dreaming, or was this another agent of the Gorm? She didn't have any metal shards poking out of her face, but still. "Expecting you, dear? I should say so. Saw it in the bones years ago, and now we'd better hurry and see to that ear. We'll lose him if we don't, and then we'll lose everything else. Paz looked at her poor suffering brother and then stared at the old rabbit, trying to work out whether to trust her or not. She was clearly mad, but she was a safer bet than trying to escape the Gorm on their own. The she-rabbit stared back with piercing blue eyes that looked much younger than her face. Her nose wrinkled and twitched as she waited for Paz to make her decision. Finally, she nodded. "All right, we'll come with you. But if you try and trick us..." Paz had Star Claw clenched in one hand. It would cut through the rabbit's flesh just like it had Podkin's ear. The she-rabbit nodded, as if satisfied that things were going to plan. Good, good. Just what you're supposed to say, dear." She walked to the edge of the clearing and then paused to draw a bronze sickle from her belt. Bending down, she started cutting a slender pine sapling with it. While she was busy, 1,000 thoughts raced through Paz's mind. What if she's a traitor like Lady Russet? What if she's a witch? Don't you remember what happens to little rabbits that go off with witches in the forest? The she-rabbit finished cutting off the sapling and used it like a broom to swish away their footprints in the snow. When she had finished, she looked up, an impatient frown on her face. "Well, are you coming or not?" she said. "Hop along, my little bunnies." Then she turned and vanished into the undergrowth. Witch or not, there wasn't much else Paz could do but follow. They wound through their way through the bushes and trees, Podkin moaning softly and stopping every now and then for the she-rabbit to hide their tracks, until they came to the biggest oak tree that Paz had ever seen. It had a cascade of gnarled, squirming roots that spilled down from the sloped bank of earth. The towering trunk was thick enough to be 4 or 5 centuries old, and its branches, weighed down with snow, dipped to the forest floor, making a kind of lattice-work cave. A cage of wood and snow that, in happier time, would have been an amazing play den. However, it wouldn't be much good at keeping out the Gorm. Paz watched as the she-rabbit ducked through the branches, hoping she had a better plan than just hiding amongst the tangles of roots. Instead, she pushed at a spot on the packed earth of the bank. It looked like a bare patch of mud covered in moss, lichen and dead leaves, but, to Paz's surprise, it swung open to reveal a hidden door. She hurried inside, helping the bleary Podkin along. As soon as they were in, the old rabbit shut the door and bolted it. "This is it," thought Paz. "This is when the witch makes us into a pie or some kind of casserole." But no such thing happened. Instead, the she-rabbit hung up her cloak and busied herself by stoking the fire inside the little clay stove. She put a pot on top and poured in some water from a clay pitcher before taking Podkin's hand and leading him to sit on the little stool by the hearth. Paz couldn't help worrying that the warming stove might be intended for them, but seeing as they weren't being eaten just yet, she took the chance to look around. They were in a tidy little house, burrowed beneath the huge roots of the oak. The earth between them had been whitewashed, and reed mats covered the floor. Pots, pans and utensils hung from the ceiling, and there was a small fireplace complete with mantelpiece where the stove nestled. Shelves had been carved into the earth of the walls, and more had been added, made from old warped planks of wood. Every inch of this were packed with a strange collection of items, too many for Paz to really take in. She saw lots of clay pots and jars, all labelled with neat writing, some overflowing with dried herbs and bulbs, wild garlic, rosemary, foxglove, rose hip and lots of mushrooms, like ink cap, blusher, penny bun, brittle grill and angel's bonnet. Paz saw many other, strangest things that she could only wonder about. A glass jar filled with bird skulls, a painted wooden mask with fangs and a huge eye, a clay model of a peaceful rabbit sitting cross-legged, from whose head a spire of scented smoke slowly uncurled. So this is what a witch has in her house, she thought. But there were other, more homely things too. A bed in the corner, a spinning wheel, a loom and some cupboards. There was even a leaded glass window framed by the tree roots. Paz went over and peered outside. What she saw made her clap her hands over her mouth to stop her from screaming. A pack of gaunt riders were a few metres away, grinding their way through the snow. Their hunched iron beasts were ploughing up the ground, splattering it with black oil, while their riders sat atop, slowly turning their heads this way and that. Their jagged, serrated swords twitched, hungry for rabbit flesh. She could hear the screeching and grating of metal. She could smell the hot oil and burnt blood stink. Any moment now, they would spot the secret door in the bank and come crashing through. "Don't you worry about them," said the she-rabbit, as she took the water from the stove and set it down beside Podkin. "They won't find us here. There's enough glamours and enchantments about this place that Herne himself couldn't find it, even if he didn't want him to." And true enough, now the Gorm were turning their mounts and seemed to be heading off towards the far end of the bank and away. "Proper magic," a little voice in Paz's head said. "Not only a witch, but a good one." She smiled herself and went over to where Podkin was sitting. "This is nasty," said the she-rabbit. "Going to need stitches." She had a blunt, matter-of-fact way about her that Paz found reassuring somehow. She clearly knew what she was doing. "Will he be all right?" Paz asked. "As right as one-eared rabbit can be. Still, it will do him a favour in the long run. Nobody is interested in telling stories about a normal rabbit." Stories? The long run? What was she talking about? As Paz watched, the old rabbit gave Podkin something to drink that sent him to sleep. They moved him over to the bed and then cleaned the wound with warm water. The she-rabbit stitched it with a bone needle and thread before putting on a poultice and binding it tight. She spoke as she worked, and Paz discovered her name was Bridget, and that she lived in the woods alone, foraging for foods and herbs and anything else she needed. But she didn't say. But Paz guessed she had been living under the oak tree for a very long time. Long enough to lose the knack of talking to others. Social skills were very important to Warren rabbits, but Paz guessed you didn't need them when the only person you had to worry about pleasing was yourself. As soon as Podkin was quietly sleeping, Bridget made some stinging nettle broth, which Pook gulped down. They sat by the fire, listening to the sounds of the crackling wood. It felt wonderful to be warm, fed and safe, even though their enemies were still not so very far away. They felt safe. Paz found herself drifting off to sleep. Pook was already snoring on the hearth rug, and at some point Paz joined him, dimly aware of Bridget covering them both with a patchwork blanket. She tried to say, "Thank you," or to ask one of the many questions that were whizzing about in her head, but the sleepiness was too strong, and she let herself fall into it. When she awoke, she saw Bridget sitting on a chair by the stove, holding the magic dagger Starclaw in her hands. She was turning it over, thoughtfully, pausing every now and then to peer at the copper face on the hilt. Paz watched her, wondering what to say. She didn't want to appear rude, but seeing Bridget with the dagger made her uneasy. partly because she didn't think she should be touching it, and also because there was a good chance it might slice her fingers off. The old rabbit didn't even look at Paz, but somehow she knew she was awake. Powerful magic is this here dagger, she said. One of the 12 gifts of the goddess, if I'm not mistaken. Huh? Paz began, not knowing whether to admit the star claw was. How do you know that? Got one myself. Bridget smiled and pulled the little copper sickle from her belt. When she brought it near the dagger, it flashed blue for an instant. Paz thought she saw Starclaw give an answering twinkle. How did you get one? Paz asked. I thought they were only given to chieftains of the 12 tribes. They were. Bridget tucked the sickle away again and looked into the flickering flames of the stove. I was a princess once. Not that you'd know it now, of course. I reckon you must be too. My father was chief of Redwater Warren a long time back now. One of his guard double-crossed him and forced him out. All our family had to leave, cast out of our home like wandering tinkers. I knew about the sickle and decided that lot didn't deserve to have it, so I took it with me. It glows red whenever it's near poison, blue when it's near something good. Taught me all I know about herbcraft and healing, it did. Paz found it hard to imagine the bent old she-rabbit as a princess, sitting at the head table in the long burrow, or dressed in her finest for the carrot mess feast at harvest time. Was it Chief Russet who did that to your family? He always seemed such a friendly rabbit. Not him, but his father before, the evil two-faced son of a weasel. He was the captain of the honour guard as well. Always too trusting, my old father, and look where it got him. My folks moved on afterwards, but I stayed here in the woods. I watched them turn the warren inside out, looking for the sickle, and it was here with me the whole time. She gave a dry chuckle that sounded like a pile of leaves rustling. When she laughed, Paz could see the little girl still inside her, and she found herself smiling too. The 3 little rabbits stayed with Bridget for more than 2 weeks. Podkin slowly began to build up strength while his ear healed. He was very bad-tempered about the whole thing. He used to secretly think his ears were his best feature. But when Bridget told him he had to get as much rest as possible, he was quite pleased. It was the first time in his life that anyone had actually ordered him to have lots of snoozes. Pook enjoyed rolling around on Bridget's floor, playing with the rattling bones and pebbles she used for scouring the future. He just used to toss them about the hearth, making patterns and piles. But Bridget said he had a gift for toothsaying all the same. Every now and then, she would walk over and examine the bones he had thrown and mumble some comments like, "Yes, he will come in handy," and "must stack up on that sleep potion then." Pook would look up at her with big, loving eyes and a nod in agreement. Excuse me. Paz went out foraging with the old rabbit several times and was beginning to learn a fair bit of the forest lore. She learnt which mushrooms were good to eat and which ones would make you cough up your innards, how to find a squirrel's stash of winter nuts, and which trees had bark that you could chew to stop a fever. She learnt the names of plants like candlewick, maypops and love and idleness, and how to prepare them and use them as medicines. Podkin watched all this and couldn't help but feel a little jealous. After all, he was the one with the magic dagger, wasn't he? Shouldn't he be the one learning about spells and poisons? It all sounded quite exciting, even if it did involve having to listen and remember things. One day he built up enough courage to ask Bridget if she could tell him about magic. What kind? Was all the old rabbit said. Paz looked up from where she was crushing dried seeds with a mortar and pestle and picked her ears with interest. There are different kinds. The good kind and the bad. What's the bad kind? You've seen